Howdy, folks. Welcome to another episode of the Preparedness Podcast, the podcast that brings you the best in preparedness information. You can find us online at www.thepreparednesspodcast.com. My name is Rob Hannes, and I'm the host for the show. You can reach me at rob@prepcast.info. This podcast is continuing our series on hyperinflation. In the first of this series, episode 128, I went over what inflation and hyperinflation is and how they're created. We also covered the announcement of QE3 to infinity, which is basically the same thing as printing money out of thin air. In this podcast, we're going to be covering how to prepare for hyperinflation. Because the sheer amount of information that I'm going to be covering, there's going to be a third podcast to this series. This will be Preparing for Hyperinflation Part 1, and we're going to be talking about what you can expect during a massive and hyperinflation economy. I think it's important to know what you can expect during these types of periods so you can properly prepare for it. In Preparing for Hyperinflation Part 2, which will be the third part of the series, we're going to look at those things that you can do to get ready for this. Obviously, prepping in general is going to be a good thing, but there are some extra things that you can do to lessen the impact of massive inflation. We're going to dive right into this in just a little bit. I want to take care of just a couple announcements real quick, though. I only really have a couple announcements that I want to get to. The first one is the Prepper Expos next month, October 2012. There will be in Mesa, Arizona, both of them actually. One is the first weekend of the month. The other one is the last weekend of the month, if I remember correctly. Easiest way for me to tell you how to get the information is to go to the website, use the search bar, and search for Prepper Expo, and you'll find the post that has all the information in it. Dave Duffy of Backwoods Home Magazine is supposed to be at the second expo, which is the self-reliance expo. That's the one at the end of the month. So I'm kind of looking forward to meeting him. I haven't met him before. My wife and I will be at both of them, so you can stop us and say hi. We'll be the ones in the Preparedness Podcast logo T-shirts. And the other thing I wanted to mention was the newsletter. Actually, it's not a newsletter. It's a weekly tips email that I send out that's got some great tips. These are full-length articles, exclusive content for the newsletter and the tip subscribers. So if you haven't signed up yet, go to the website and click on either the newsletter banner that's on the side or I think there's a newsletter navigation up at the top. Okay, so let's get into this hyperinflation stuff. Basically, last podcast, episode 128, I talked about what is inflation, what is hyperinflation, how it happens, and lay down a really good foundation for that. In this podcast, there are two main topics I want to cover, and that is basically what we can expect during hyperinflation and how we can prepare for hyperinflation. Okay, so the first part here, what to expect during hyperinflation. Expect the worst, hope for the best. I'm just going to start here with an overview or a summary, and then we're going to delve into this in more detail. In a nutshell, life will still go on. It will just be different. Hyperinflation will be bad, but you got to remember it won't be forever. It's not going to be a Mad Max scenario. I think too many preppers and survivalists, when they think about disasters and emergencies and crises, they think of Mad Max. It's not going to be Mad Max. In fact, it's going to be far from Mad Max. So don't be planning for that. What I mean by this is that you're still going to have to live, you're still going to have to eat, you're still going to have to raise your children, earn a wage, pay your bills, etc. Now, some people will become very destitute. This does and will happen. However, not everyone is going to be suddenly out of a job overnight. There are still going to be commerce, and people are still going to be working. There's still going to be opportunity for business, and you are just going to have to find out what that is and try to get yourself into that so you can continue to earn a wage. Even in a depression, there are still businesses and opportunities for business, and there are a lot of niche markets, and you're going to have to find those assuming that you lose your job and need to find another wage. You're going to have to become very clever, and you're going to have to think about how you can provide a service or a good for people, and you'd be surprised at all the things that people have done. I'm not going to actually go into a history on that. There's a lot of information on the internet, but just keep in mind that just because you lose your job doesn't mean it's the end of the world. You're going to have to get creative and innovative to be able to continue to earn a wage and an income during a depression or a hyperinflationary event. Okay, here's an overall summary for some of the things that we can expect. From this point forward, now that QE3 to infinity has been enacted, it's going to get worse, but probably not before it seems like it's getting better. And you need to make sure that you're not fooled by this, and you need to take advantage of this time to prepare. It's a lot like the eye of a hurricane. When the hurricane comes ashore, people get hit, they get snockered, and then the eye comes ashore and passes over them, and they think, oh, great, it's over. And then suddenly they're hit again with the other side of the eye wall. Don't fall for that. It might get better. Everybody on TV might be telling you it's better. You need to look past that and know that eventually the bottom is going to drop out. Honestly, we don't know how bad it's going to get. We could only see, and I say only in air quotes, mass inflation, and that would be, say, between 10 and 30% inflation. Even if we don't officially get into hyperinflation at 30% plus annual inflation, mass inflation would be bad enough. Increasing debt will put increasing financial pressures on social services. This leads to reducing services because of the higher cost providing these services. Again, that's inflation. We can look forward to services like road repair, postal service, and garbage collection as some of the things that will probably be scaled back. If this turns into an extreme event, we'll be looking at the lack of water and electricity due either to the lack or inability to pay for the required materials needed to keep these services going, or the fewer workers that are going to be around due to the layoffs. Gas prices are going to increase to painfully high levels. It's going to make it difficult for people to move around and for things to be shipped. Some trucks will stop running due to no money for fuel. The lack of inventory on shelves means there will be less available to buy, and most won't be able to afford the prices for those items that are available. They're going to have to make choices as to what they need to buy. Right now, there are millions on some form of welfare. At some point, this welfare is going to stop simply because the government can't afford it anymore. When this happens, there will be a lot of angry people who suddenly can't get food and medical care. There's a great article on this by Matt Bracken. I talked about it in episode 129 briefly. Hopefully you've read it. If you haven't, I'll have a link in the show notes of where you can go read this article. I highly recommend you do. It paints a very grim reality of what we may be facing soon. It's 100% plausible and only a few short steps from what is actually going on right now. And there's no hunger right now. So imagine what it would be when people suddenly become hungry. Another resource is Furfowl's blog at furfowl.blogspot.com. I'll have a link in the show notes. Furfowl is the internet name for Fernando Aguirre, who lived through the economic collapse of Argentina in the late 1990s and early 2000s. He also has a book on the same topic, and I'll put a link to the show notes if you're interested. It's on the expensive side. His blog has some good information in it. However, I didn't really find the book as informative as I had hoped. However, if you're looking for every scrap of information from people that have actually gone through hyperinflation, this would be one of your resources that you may want to check out. Crime and violence will increase, as it is now, but when the welfare stops, expect violence to increase even beyond what it is now. There will be mass riots and looting, much like we've seen in Greece and Spain. When most of the population cannot afford even the basics of food, the entitlement culture will riot, pillage, loot, and burn. This increase in crime will prevent police, firefighters, and EMS from helping people. Many places will simply be allowed to burn. And as Matt Bracken points out in that article, no stores in these areas will be restocked during this violence, which in turn will create more violence. Suburban and rural areas can expect to see some of this violence spill over into their areas, as there will be some that forage out from the cities looking for basic supplies. Recently, there was a bank robber in Los Angeles. I think this was a couple of weeks ago, so that would be mid-September 2012, where the robbers drove through a poor neighborhood and threw money out the window onto the streets. And of course, this money was quickly snatched up by the residents while they were trying to shield the bank robbers from the police. Now, was this planned, or was it just an impromptu move by the bank robbers who figured out they weren't going to be able to get away? Who knows? But how many others are now looking at that episode, that event, and thinking the same thing, but only with food? And maybe not food now, but they will look at that and go, we could do that. For example, it would be completely plausible for somebody to hijack a truck carrying food, drive it through the poor neighborhood, and start tossing or offloading its contents as they drive through for the residents that have no money for food. Okay, the thin blue line, this is the police, that's what we call it, the thin blue line, can only control a populace when the vast majority of people behave. And at most times, most people do. But when you have a population that is hungry and their family are hungry, we're going to see many people do whatever they think is necessary to survive. This makes regular people threatening and criminals even more dangerous. As things get worse, we'll see squatter camps and shantytowns pop up all over the place as more people have no place else to go. We'll see these pop up anywhere and everywhere there's free land, which means no rent, like parks and stuff like that, and where there are resources close by, water, food scraps, or garbage cans so they can root around and get food scraps. We're going to see those all over the place. There's a good basic article that explains what hyperinflation is and why it's going to happen, and it's a good basic it's very simple, it's fairly short, and it's a good one to send to your friends and relatives that might be on the fence about that. It's called Hyperinflation is Inevitable, How You Can Prepare, and it's by Aaron Humphreys. I'll put a link to the show notes so you can get to it. All right, let's look a little closer and dig down into some more details for these specific areas. The first one I want to cover is general inflation, and this is how it's going to affect people in the economy. Governments choose hyperinflation because they have no choice. The alternative is to make the economy go into depression, which is something they're trying to avoid. Now, we started this path way back when the government first begins deficit spending, which is borrowing money to pay for things now with the intention of paying it back later. However, this later payback never occurs. If you look at our history, you can see this started decades ago. As politicians are not personally responsible for the money they spend through the government, they feel no direct responsibility and assume that their successors will find a solution. By the time they realize that there is a problem, they're unable to stop the addictive cycle of spending and choose to hyperinflate the money supply instead, thinking that they can stave off a depression by paying off their debts with printed money. It never works, and politicians never learn. Oddly enough, hyperinflation can be aggravated by citizens themselves. When people lose confidence in the currency, they begin spending it as soon as they get it. Now, how fast people turn around and spend money that they've just received is called the velocity of money. When people feel that the purchasing power of the currency is falling dramatically, they spend it quickly before the value drops even more and the money buys them less. The velocity money is one of the things that the government is trying to prevent. This purchasing power can drop so fast that holding cash even for a day means that you'll be buying less with it when you go to spend it, and thus no one holds the currency any longer than they need to, which further decreases the confidence in the currency. Hyperinflation is ended either by changing the currency or by the country going to war. Now, ideally, the new currency is backed by something that's stable like gold, We've heard of the gold standard, but often governments just issue another fiat currency, hoping to dupe the citizens into thinking that this currency is more solvent than what it just replaced. Sometimes this happens several times before the government finally figures out that the citizens aren't as stupid as they think they are and actually resort to something that really works. Or they just go to war. The effect of inflation is that we end up paying more for the very same things that cost us less just a short time ago. Purchasing power is wiped out in respect to the domestic currency, not necessarily foreign currency. People with savings will see it eroded away. This is important to understand because any savings or investments that you have that are tied to the US dollar, which means they're in dollars, are going to lose value during a hyperinflationary event. Resource shortages. The raw materials for some items will become too expensive to keep manufacturing from them. Also, the closing of some businesses will mean that their products are no longer available. When there are less items available, this can also increase hyperinflation as there are too few items being chased by too many dollars. Anytime this happens, prices rise. Likewise, if a manufacturer goes out of business, the prices for those existing items increases, which again helps to accelerate the hyperinflation. Price and wage controls. Governments always think they can simply regulate everything, and even that which they have already demonstrated they know nothing about. This is how we get into an inflationary runaway situation, because they don't know what they're doing. Price controls will be limits on how high sellers can price their product. These price controls also try to stop people from using other forms of currency, such as gold, silver, or other commodities, which is bartering and foreign money. This often leads to shortages and a black market. Wage controls. Basically, this is the government telling companies how much they must pay an employee. These types of controls only serve to make the problems worse. They never solve anything, ever. But as government can't stand losing control and letting the market fix itself, they prefer to take action, even if it's obviously wrong. Bartering will become more common, but that doesn't mean it's going to be the new way people conduct business. It's just not going to happen. As preppers, we've all heard how we need to stock up on barter supplies. Don't do it. Don't count on bartering. There's a reason we use money now. To understand this, you really need to understand what money is and why we use it. Explaining this actually goes beyond the scope of this podcast, but basically, if bartering works so great, today's economy would be based on bartering. There are some really huge issues with bartering, which is why we don't use it very much now. Now, this doesn't mean that bartering is never a good idea. Only that a barter economy will be small and it won't last very long. People require a means of trading that has a standardized value. This makes commerce a lot easier. Now, the trading value in a depression or an inflationary or any event where the local currency has been devalued and has collapsed, it's almost always a precious metal like gold or silver. This is because there is intrinsic value in gold and silver, and people have relied on it for thousands of years. Now, over the past couple decades, I have talked to a lot of preppers, and the single biggest issue, I think, for most of them is that they don't understand how money works and why it exists. This leads them to think that owning gold and silver has no place in their preparedness plans. I can tell you for a fact that gold, and most likely silver, will be the standard on which all trading will be based when the US dollar fails. Now, of course, this doesn't mean that if you're struggling to get enough food storage and other preps that you should forgo those and buy metals. I don't recommend that. Nor do I suggest that you go into debt in the acquisition of metals. This would obviously be foolhardy. However, if you have any savings or investments, you really need to research what I'm telling you, because when the dollar collapses, any money that you have that is denominated in US dollars also collapses. Now, another way of looking at this is gold and silver are inflation resistant, if not inflation proof. When the bottom drops in the dollar, metals still have value. Okay, let's get back to bartering. Here's why it doesn't work too well. I try to come up with a a believable scenario, but this is pretty much how it happens. Let's say you plan to make soap and knit caps. You're very good at this, and you figure that these are things that people will need and will be needing in a collapsed economy, and your plan is to trade other people for the things that you need. Now, let's say you're looking for some honey and some meat. Now, while you have the nicest and warmest caps and the nicest smelling bars of soap that anybody has seen in a long time, the person that has the honey doesn't need either caps or soap. They have plenty of both. What they do need is a dentist. However, since you're not a dentist, no trade. So when you talk to the farmer that has cows, he would like to trade you for some of your soap, but he's not going to give you an entire cow for a few bars of soap. It's too unequal. It's not balanced of a trade. He probably won't even trade you his whole cow no matter how many bars of soap you gave him. He simply doesn't need that much soap, and he has other things that he needs besides soap that he's hoping to trade the cow for. Now, in both of these cases, you are unable to trade because of the inequity of your goods. Yes, you could try to strike up a deal where you involve a bunch of people that are all intertrading amongst themselves, and you work out so that you trade with this guy who's got the stuff that the honey guy wants and all this other stuff. But basically, it's a mess, and usually somebody always feels they get the short end of the stick. Now, that's why we don't have a barter economy now, and it's why we won't have one in the future. We fix all these issues with money. Money has a standardized value that makes it easy to trade value for value with somebody else. So while bartering might work for a very short period of time, or even occasionally, now, or every once in a while, you might have an even trade, or you might be willing to give up more in order to get something you really need. That happens, but after a while, it doesn't continue to work, and it breaks down. From what I've read of other depressions, past depressions and collapses, the things that you stock up for your barter are usually used for bribing or gifting. So I suppose if you are looking at that, then I suppose you could do that. Another thing we can expect from inflation is austerity measures. I'm sure you've heard of this over in Europe for Greece and Spain and Italy. And basically, this is government slashing spending. We're going to cover more on this in a little bit. Now, there is a really great PDF on past hyperinflation events, and it lists where and when they occurred and how bad the inflation was. In the PDF, there's this really great column that basically shows you the time required for prices to double, which I think is the easiest way to understand the effects of inflation. And you'll see that I'm pretty sure it's Zimbabwe, which was the most recent example. They had prices at the peak of their hyperinflation. Prices were doubling every day. So if your bread cost $1, tomorrow it costs $2. The next day it cost $4. The next day it cost $8. And if you just keep going with that, you'll see how the prices run away. That was what it was like at their peak. Now, I was playing around with this PDF not too long ago, and I was going through there, and I found something that was really interesting. Now, most of us, hyperinflation, yeah, that's something that happened way back like in the 20s and 30s, or maybe even, sooner, and we're really not familiar with that. Well, there are 48 countries on this hyperinflation table, and actually this is the Hankey-Kruse hyperinflation table. That's what it's called. It's on Wikipedia. I will put a link in the show notes so you can get to it. However, there are 48 countries that have gone through hyperinflation. Now, the really interesting part about this is that 33 of those countries have gone through hyperinflation since 1980. That's the majority of the countries that have experienced hyperinflation occurring in the last 32 years. Now, I'm guessing that most of the people that listen to my voice right now are older than 32 years, which means the majority of hyperinflationary events have occurred within your lifetime. Now, if you think about that in relation to history, I find that just flooring. I also think it points to more evidence that it is very possible for that to happen in this country. Okay, we've been talking about inflation and hyperinflation and what to expect, and we're going to cover more of that as well as go into what we can do to prepare for hyperinflation. But I want to take a couple minutes. I want to talk about a couple of our sponsors because I think they're very relevant to what we're talking about. As I mentioned before, we look specifically for advertisers that can help us get prepared. And these two sponsors definitely can do that. We just got done talking about gold and silver and how it's going to maintain its value. FlyingEagleGold.com is the place I recommend that you go talk to Jeff about getting some gold and silver. Find out from a historical perspective. He knows the nuts and bolts of this, and he can help you get set up in getting some gold and silver to protect your savings. Jeff also has a business where he can take your IRA and roll it over to precious metals. There are some details with that, but if you are looking into protecting your investments, give Jeff a call or go to the website and take a look at the information he has. You can go to flyingeaglegold.com or better to go to the website at www.thepreparednesspodcast.com and click on the Flying Eagle Gold banner. It'll take you right to the page so you can start learning about this. The other sponsor is something I'm going to be talking about a little bit later, and that's about starting your own gardening, learning to grow your own food. It's going to be critically important that you know how to grow your own food because the food in the grocery stores are going to be exponentially expensive, whereas you can take some cheap seeds. They're hugely inexpensive right now. Plant them, grow them, and they cost you nothing but a little bit of time and a little bit of care, and you can grow your own food. Seedsnow.com has a huge selection of seeds that are 100% natural. They're non-GMO. They're non-hybrid. They're all packaged in resealable, moisture-proof packets. They're not in these paper envelopes. If you call them up, they can help explain to you what seeds or what vegetables will grow in the area where you live or where your retreat is. They can help educate you on what you should buy for your area and what's the best way to store them for years. And right now they're offering the listeners of the Preparedness Podcast a 10% discount on your entire purchase. All you have to do is go to the Preparedness Podcast website, click on the Seeds Now banner, and make sure to use the code PREP10 for the discount. This is one investment that won't break your bank, but will definitely provide you with some satisfaction and peace of mind knowing that you have quality seeds for growing your own food. Okay, let's get back to this. We still have a lot to go. I'm trying very hard not to make this into a three-part episode. We're coming up in a half hour here really soon, so I'm going to try to get through this. All right, let's take a look at money in banking. Simply put, cash will be king. Now, I know that seems kind of counterintuitive because I'm telling you that cash is going to be worthless, but yet cash is going to be king. Well, let's get into this and explain why. You should have several months of bills on hand at a minimum. 6 to 12 months would definitely be better. Now, primarily, this gives you options. If you need to buy something, you have the cash on hand. However, more importantly, it keeps your money out of banks where you have no real control over it. Keeping your money in banks means that bankers are in control of your money, not you. Now, expect bank runs, especially in the beginning phases as people start to freak out and want to spend their money before it loses any more buying power. Now, they may not be thinking about it in those terms, but that's what we can expect. Also expect bank holidays, especially if there's bank runs. That means banking and all digital transactions will cease during this, quote, holiday. This includes ATMs, check cashing, and the use of debit and credit cards. Incidentally, one of the recent weekly tips that I put out dealt with this very thing in detail about going back to cash. And so this is one of the types of articles you can find in there. So if you haven't signed up for the newsletter tips, you should go ahead and do that. Anyways, avoid safe deposit boxes. Sooner or later, these are going to get raided as governments go looking for sources of revenue. Now, this has already happened during the last recession. Back in 2009, I had a blog post that had a video with a news report about this happening, and I went to go look at it, and that video has been pulled down. But I'm sure there are videos out there that still talk about this if you go look them up. Another thing that you can look forward to are more foreclosures and bankruptcies. However, due to the changes in the bankruptcy laws, current and future, I'm not sure about the latter, but we will definitely see more of the former. As long as banks are continuing to get bailouts from the Fed and the government, they'll probably be lenient on foreclosures, and I put lenient in air quotes. But once taxpayer handouts stop, they will be looking for cash just like everybody else, and if that means foreclosing on you and selling the house for some quick cash, they're going to do it. Now, when banks reopen, you're not going to be allowed to withdraw all your money. You're going to be limited to only a small amount per day. Banks do not have enough cash on hand for everyone to withdraw, which is why they close. Once they reopen, they limit your withdrawals for two reasons. One, it helps them keep solvent, and two, new laws are passed to slow down the velocity of money. The accepted use of foreign currencies, probably more likely along the Mexico and Canada border areas, will become more prevalent. Now, this isn't government acceptance. This is acceptance by the shopkeepers. Remember, the government is going to pass laws to try to stop people from using other currencies other than the U.S. dollar to pay for things. Now, what some people have done in the past is to wear their wealth in the form of jewelry. Now, obviously, you shouldn't be flaunting this wealth, and you need to keep it on the down low, like under your clothes or hidden. But it is one way that you can carry the money or your wealth with you everywhere you go. That kind of makes it fairly secure as opposed to leaving it someplace else where it can be stolen. One of the common things that I found people have done in past economic depressions was to wear 18-karat gold necklaces. These links of these chains can be taken off one or a few at a time as needed. And this is, I think, a big reason why gold jewelry is so popular in India and Pakistan right now. Okay, let's think about the most recent case of hyperinflation in Zimbabwe, where people would pan for gold in a local river all day just for a few grams of gold. These few grams of gold bought the things they needed to survive every day. Now, in early 2009, 1/10 of a gram of gold bought one loaf of bread. Or, in other words, 1 gram of gold would buy 10 loaves. Now, there's a video where you can see the Zimbabwean people talking about this. And again, link in the show notes. Now, just to be clear, a troy ounce and an ounce aren't the same. Close enough for rough estimates, but a troy ounce is about 1.1 ounces. So let's take a look at this. 1 troy ounce equals about 31.1 grams. The video that was posted on February 10th of 2009, I don't know exactly when it was taken, but let's use the gold price on February 6th, which was the Friday before the video was posted. Let's call it close enough. The price of gold at the close of markets on February 6, 2009 was $910 per ounce. Hold on. What's the price of gold today? Yeah. Anyways, 910 divided by 31.1, which is the number of grams per ounce, is $29.12. If 10 loaves of bread cost you $29.12, that means 1 loaf would cost you about $2.91, which is pretty close to today's prices and not too bad if you need a loaf of bread. Now, keep in mind, during inflation, the value of an item pretty much stays the same. It's the amount of local currency that increases, and we can see this directly in this Zimbabwe example. They were paying basically $3 for a loaf of bread, which in this country right now,
Some places that's high, some places that's low. So close enough for average for this this debate. But they were paying, well, I don't know, 10 trillion Zimbabwe dollars for a loaf of bread. It's insane. There are a couple points that we can learn from this mess in Zimbabwe. One, things can get so bad that no one accepts the local currency at all, and that's what we saw there. Foreign currency may be used for a time, but after a while, people will revert to hard currency, which is gold and silver. Two, there is a business economy going on, even during some of the worst hyperinflation we've ever seen. Three, people will still need a form of currency, and hard metals are what people always go to in some form or another. In the United States, I think that the metal currency will probably be silver, as there are many people that have it, and it's easier to make change for a 1 ounce of silver than it is a 1 ounce of gold. Okay, you can also pay off your debt with inflated money. Now, this is something that you hardly hear anybody talk about, but unless your debt is keyed to the inflation rate, it doesn't change. So as the inflation is making the dollar worthless, you can pay off your debt with devalued money. This is the same thing that the banks do, but they don't want you to know about it. For example, let's say you owe $10,000 on your car. It's quite possible that a few loaves of bread could cost this much in a very bad hyperinflation. Now remember, the money is devaluing so much that they're just stamping zeros on the bills. Your debt for $10,000 doesn't go up with the inflation. It's still only $10,000. So, thus as it is, when that dollar inflates too much, you should be able to pay, or you should be able to easily wipe out your debt with those inflated dollars. However, there is a big caveat that goes with this, and that is your income doesn't go up at the same rate as inflation is increasing. So running up a big debt isn't probably the smartest thing, because you might not get the chance to actually pay it off. The biggest thing I want you to realize in this section is that any savings you have will be eroded away to nothing if you just let it sit there. Okay, let's look at jobs in a hyperinflationary, what we can expect. There will be massive layoffs and unemployment, as companies can no longer afford to stay in operation for one reason or another. Unemployment will continue to rise. However, it will not become 100%. There will still be business being conducted. There will still be people going to work and some form of regular life. It's just going to be much more complicated. We will see many businesses close their doors as people tighten their belts and limit their budgets. What I mean by this is that some businesses will go out because they can't afford the raw material or they can't afford to pay their employees. Other businesses will go out of business because nobody's buying their products because people tighten their belts and they're only buying what they have to buy. Okay, let's talk about crime. Crime will be rising as more and more people cannot afford the basics of life. We saw increases of crime during the recession just a few years ago, but a hyperinflationary collapse will see even much more than that. Terrorism. Not many people know this, but we export our inflation to other countries, and this just makes the anti-American sentiment worse. During an economic collapse, the lack of funding and manpower will probably mean that it will be easier for them to hit us. We're going to see a lot of fuel thefts. If this conjures up the picture of people siphoning gas out of your tank with a hose, forget it. What they're going to do instead is they're going to be punching a hole in your plastic fuel tank and draining the gas out the bottom. Looting and riots. When there isn't any food or medicine to be had because the welfare stops, people are going to be angry and initially strike out. Once this initial lashing out fails to produce any results, though, we're going to see the looting and rioting grow in a scale, and it's going to extend farther and farther out from their neighborhoods. Again, see Bracken's article. Okay, what can we expect from government? Pretty much, it's going to be more of the same that got us to this point. I don't expect any change. Government leaders aren't going to do anything unless they're forced to, and then it'll probably be heavy-handed, illogical, and wrong. Not to mention there will probably be a power play of some form to enact more socialism. We've been down this road before in this country, so it's not unlikely that we'll do it again. Even back in history, remember the hyperinflation that Germany went through back in 1922 to 1923 saw Adolf Hitler coming to power. So things like this do happen. More things we can look forward to are the deterioration of infrastructure, bridges, roads, tunnels, sewage and public works. All of this is going to suffer. If you think you live in a city that has big potholes now, just imagine what it's like when nobody's fixing them at all. We may even see rail lines and airports suffer from this lack of maintenance. Utility lines and pipes will go without maintenance even after there's outages. All of this is going to be caused by a lack of money. This also means less police, less firefighting, less emergency services like ambulance and paramedics. Towns and cities will not have the funds to keep these forces well staffed, and those personnel that are left will be tasked with keeping the government officials as safe as possible. Corruption. This is a big reason why we got to this point in the first place, and I see no reason why it would stop once the economy crashes. Austerity. This is where the government has to stop paying for social programs. It's unlikely that they're going to start with the logical and common sense stuff first, though. People in government always like to scare the public with stuff like, oh, I don't think this austerity is a good idea. We'll have to cut back on our police forces and school teachers. They're always the first to get cut because they're trying to make a point to the public and punish them for wanting a smaller government. As an example, we see this in every California city that's going bankrupt right now. Eventually, what austerity really means is that there's no more money in the government coffers and social programs will die out. This includes things like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, midnight basketball, welfare, and EBT cards. Again, see Matt Bracken's article about this. This also means cutbacks in government benefits and public services such as electricity, gas, fire police, healthcare, military, broadcasting, libraries, public housing, waste management, garbage pickup, you name it. All the services that government provides are going to be scaled way back. And we're going to see higher taxes, fees, and tariffs. Okay, this is as far as I'm going to take this portion of the series. We're already at 42 minutes, and I want to go ahead and close it out so it doesn't get too much longer. In part 3 of this hyperinflation series, I'm going to give you some very specific things that you can do to prepare for hyperinflation. This is in addition to all the normal preps that you're doing. So these are specific things for inflationary events that should help you get prepared. I decided to go ahead and split it up at this point because the next part is about 20-25 minutes, and that would have made this podcast about an hour or even a little bit over, and I didn't want to I'm trying not to do long podcasts, as I had said when I relaunched the series. So look forward to part 3. It'll be out in a day or two, so you should be able to get it pretty quick. Again, thanks for downloading and listening, and until next time, enjoy life and be safe.